The greatest biological fraud ever perpetrated against the human mind is the feeling we call love. It has an expiration date, and it is usually stamped 4 years from the initial ignition. We spend our lives chasing an emotional state that evolution never intended to be permanent, mistaking a temporary, powerful neurological delusion for a soul-deep connection. And then we are shocked, wounded, and emotionally bankrupted when the inevitable biological filter kicks in. The 4-year filter is not some cynical theory. It is the fundamental economic truth of the human reproductive cycle, a ruthless accounting system dictated by oxytocin, dopamine, and the high cost of raising a vulnerable infant. If you believe in soulmates, if you hold on to the destructive fantasy of everlasting passion, you are operating on a broken script, deliberately ignoring the cold, hard wiring beneath your own skull that demands efficiency and eventual cessation. The chemical love you feel, the dizzying, heart-stopping, world-stopping attraction, is merely scaffolding. It is a high-grade, temporary neurological structure erected solely to ensure one specific task: pairing up two disparate and inherently selfish organisms long enough to combine genetic material and survive the most fragile years of child-rearing. Once that window of critical dependency begins to close, usually coinciding with the child's ability to walk, eat solids, and achieve a degree of rudimentary self-preservation, the evolutionary pressure to maintain the costly, maniacal state of infatuation vanishes. This is where relationships routinely die, and it is why the 4-year mark is such a predictable graveyard of passion. For 48 months, your brain is running a highly inefficient, addictive, and blinding program known chemically as limerence. You are addicted to the novel stimulus, swimming in norepinephrine, the chemical equivalent of adrenaline, and dopamine, creating a hyper-focused state where the partner's flaws are literally filtered out. Serotonin levels drop, mirroring the brain chemistry of obsessive-compulsive disorder, ensuring that the object of affection is the only thing you can truly focus on. You are not in love with a person. You are captivated by a perfect neurochemical projection of them. The purpose of this chemical madness is to override caution, ignore incompatibility, and force reproductive action against the natural human inclination toward comfortable solitude. But the human body cannot sustain this hormonal state. It is metabolically expensive, psychologically exhausting, and ultimately counterproductive to long-term survival once the immediate need has been met. The body, being a superb economist, begins to pull back the funding. The dopamine receptors habituate, the norepinephrine jitters calm down. The obsession fades, not because the relationship failed, but because the biological success criteria have been fulfilled, and the body initiates the transition from volatile attraction to placid attachment. This transition is where modern relationships fatally derail. We have been so deeply indoctrinated by romantic cinema and shallow poetry that we mistake the decay of the chemical high for the decay of the connection itself. When the dopamine runs dry, when the partner is no longer a fascinating mystery, but a predictable cohabitant, we perceive this normalization as a catastrophic failure of intimacy rather than a successful evolutionary shift. We panic, assuming the relationship is dead, when in reality, the addiction is dead. We then commit the cardinal sin. We abandon a viable partnership in search of a new neurological hit, reinitiating the toxic, intoxicating cycle with a new person, only to crash and burn exactly 4 years later. If you are tired of this predictable cycle, if you are weary of the romantic mythology that constantly ruins deep relationships and demand a cold, hard look at human reality, then subscribe now. You need to understand the architecture of your own desires before you burn down your life chasing a feeling that was never meant to last. The true tragedy is that what comes after the 4-year filter, the realm of true companionate love, sustained by oxytocin and vasopressin, is the only sustainable form of deep human connection. Yet it is utterly unromanticized. It is slow, quiet, predictable, and requires deliberate, rational effort. It is the boring, stable partnership built on shared history, mutual goals, and chosen commitment, entirely devoid of the original manic passion. This stability, ironically, is what modern society, obsessed with constant peak experience, rejects. We mistake comfort for boredom, predictability for stagnation, and in doing so, we fail to recognize that the biological timer is not a death sentence for the relationship, but a harsh entry point into reality. The filter is the gate. Most people fail the test, opting instead for the temporary illusion of perpetually new love, never realizing they are simply rerunning the same doomed 4-year program until they are too exhausted to start over, left with nothing but a trail of casualties and the bitter knowledge that the passion they chased was a trick of the light, designed to end right when things got real. We are chasing an obsolete biological ghost, an archaic dating program that should have been updated centuries ago, but remains the default setting for every unwitting participant in the game of love. The psychological devastation of the 4-year filter is not merely the loss of a feeling, but the catastrophic failure of expectation management, driven by the modern mythology of effortless completion. We are conditioned by every piece of cultural pornography, from rom-coms to pop songs, to believe that true love is defined by sustained, frictionless intensity. Therefore, when the neurochemistry inevitably stabilizes, we experience it not as a natural transition, but as a crisis of personal inadequacy. We internalize the fading passion as evidence that we chose wrong, or worse, that we are fundamentally unlovable in a stable, boring context. The problem isn't the relationship. The problem is the ego's narcissistic demand that reality conform to the fantasy of perpetual honeymoon. This is why the suffering is so sharp. We are not grieving the partner. We are grieving the loss of our own flawless, idealized self, reflected back to us by their initial, intense admiration. We have forgotten that love is not a state of being you passively receive, but a disciplined action you aggressively choose. The initial intoxication is a biological freebie, a grace period designed solely for reproduction, requiring zero skill. The second phase, companionate love, demands the skill set we avoid at all costs. Conflict resolution without emotional volatility, the ability to find profound meaning in shared domestic banalities, and the painful recognition that your partner is not your mirror, but an entirely separate, imperfect, and sometimes annoying human being. This is the great pivot point, substituting the passive feeling of being in love with the active, rational commitment to loving. But our cultural programming equates effort with failure. If it takes work, the myth dictates it must not be the right relationship. We flee the work because it reveals an uncomfortable truth. We are addicted to the metabolism of starting relationships, the intoxicating rush of possibility, because that high allows us to temporarily escape the crushing banality of our own unexamined interior lives. The recurring search for the new, passionate hit is simply a socially acceptable form of self-medication, a neurological debt we constantly roll over. We use the external drama of new romance to avoid the internal work of cultivating resilience, patience, and true self-awareness. We are relationship tourists, perpetually moving to the next pristine beach, terrified of building a house in the messy, hurricane-prone reality of sustained partnership. This is the point where the vast majority of people get trapped, preferring the comfort of the known destructive cycle over the terrifying ambiguity of mature, non-addictive commitment. If you are reading this and feeling the cold, hard recognition of these patterns, if you value honesty over comfortable fantasy, then you need to commit to supporting the kind of content that pulls back the curtain on these painful realities. Subscribe to this channel because critical analysis of the human condition is the only viable antidote to cultural delusion. The soulmate ideology, the virulent core of romantic suffering, is nothing more than a psychological virus convincing us that maturity means finding the one person who perfectly cancels out all our internal insecurities, demanding zero personal growth. It promises perfect synchronization and effortless union, when in fact, the only thing that sustains deep connection is asynchronous, often difficult, but always mutual effort toward a shared future. When we realize the beloved is not the destined solver of our existential dread, the rage begins. We feel cheated, betrayed by a promise that was only ever made in our own minds and the cultural ether. The truth is brutal. The initial passion serves only one purpose: to make two people tolerate each other just long enough to overlook their glaring incompatibilities until the biological timer runs out. Once the timer ends, you are left with the foundational reality. Are we compatible in the absence of euphoria? Can we build something enduring on the bedrock of shared respect, even when the spark is gone? The tragic answer for most is no, because they were never building anything. They were merely standing in the chemical fire, believing the heat was the structure itself. The person who successfully navigates the four-year filter is not the one who finds a magical partner, but the one who evolves beyond the archaic need for constant manufactured excitement and accepts that the greatest romance is the silent, difficult commitment to staying. The belief that sustained, meaningful love should require no heavy lifting is the most destructive cultural lie we perpetuate. It is the narcissistic demand that the world owes you effortless fulfillment, and the inevitable disillusionment is the quiet apocalypse currently sweeping through the Middle Ages of marriage. We have institutionalized restlessness. We have defined maturity not as the ability to tolerate the necessary banality of a long-term project, but as the constant, panicked search for the next emotional peak. We are a generation addicted to the honeymoon phase, which is, by definition, the period before reality begins. We are taught to flee the moment the initial intoxication wears off, interpreting the return to stable, non-euphoric connection as a sign of fundamental relational failure, rather than the intended commencement of the actual work. True intimacy is not a perpetually exciting state. It is the mundane, shared vigilance against entropy. It is the agreement to stay in the room when all the fireworks have stopped, and the only sound is the grinding maintenance of two difficult, imperfect psyches choosing synchronicity. The brutally honest, real-world proof of this addiction is the phenomenon of the upgrade divorce. The high-status, midlife professional, male or female, who detonates a 15-year partnership, leaving behind a fundamentally good, stable person for someone who generates a powerful but profoundly unsustainable chemical spike. Observe the highly successful corporate lawyer or the entrepreneur who, having accumulated every marker of external success, suddenly realizes their partner is simply the person they built their life with, not the mythical destiny who generates permanent internal excitation. They leave the stability for the thrill, equating this newly generated anxiety and passion with authenticity or reawakened purpose. They confuse the fear of losing the new, high-risk relationship with the feeling of profound love. But look closer. This new relationship, born of flight and fueled by chemical desperation, rarely lasts longer than the 4-year mark anyway, because it lacks the foundational scaffolding the previous partnership spent a decade building. The initial marriage failed, not because the partners were mismatched, but because one partner refused to accept that every adult relationship eventually becomes maintenance, a noble, difficult, profoundly boring form of heroism. They did not divorce over incompatibility. They divorced over the intolerable horror of boredom. They sacrificed depth for the mirage of eternal intensity, mistaking the adrenaline crash for divine clarity. This is the kind of uncomfortable truth that legacy media avoids because it complicates the narrative of individual freedom and self-actualization. If you are still here, listening to the difficult anatomy of our collective delusion, it means you recognize that intellectual honesty requires resilience. We must support the spaces that refuse to traffic in comforting lies. If you value this type of deep, critical dissection of psychology and culture, hit that subscribe button right now. Supporting this channel is how we ensure that content dedicated to uncomfortable reality remains viable against the noise of cheap reassurance. The soulmate myth weaponizes dissatisfaction by teaching us to outsource our emotional regulation. It posits that your partner is responsible for filling the existential void that is, frankly, the necessary precondition of being a conscious human being. When they inevitably fail, because no human being can plug an existential hole, we deploy the catastrophic mental trigger. If they were truly my soulmate, I wouldn't feel this way. This thought is the ultimate license for relational cruelty, justifying abandonment based on a spiritual checklist that was never achievable in the first place. This is why we see the perpetual cycle of the almost committed, the person who collects nearly perfect partners, discarding them precisely when the relationship demands the shift from effortless passion to deliberate structural engineering. They are not unlucky in love. They are fundamentally immature, preferring the chaotic, high-stakes novelty of the beginning to the profound, quiet safety of the middle. They are in love with the idea of overcoming emotional adversity, but only through magical destiny, never through the mundane grit of communication and compromise. True romance is not discovering a shared past life. It is drafting a shared future, word by agonizing word. Recognizing that the greatest love story is the biography of two people who chose to stay, even when they could easily have left. Transforming disillusionment into mature devotion. We must stop searching for the person who completes us and start searching for the person who challenges us, who is compatible not in their ability to solve our problems, but in their willingness to tackle their own problems right beside us. The search for the friction-free relationship is merely moral cowardice dressed up as spiritual sophistication. We cling to the infantile standard that true love means never having to endure effort, that incompatibility is defined by the existence of struggle. This is the greatest deception of modern romance. The lie that if a relationship is right, it should feel easy, like coasting downhill. That belief system is lethal because it renders any necessary growth, which is always achieved through friction and resistance, as immediate evidence of failure. We have traded the profound depth of earned intimacy for the sterile convenience of a consumer product. If the partner requires maintenance, if they challenge your preconceived notions about yourself, if the communication requires patience and repetition, we are conditioned to believe the warranty has expired and we should immediately trade up for the next, supposedly easier model. But the relationship that never faces conflict is not a strong relationship. It is merely an empty room, a place where neither person felt safe enough to leave their true, messy belongings. Conflict is not the antithesis of love. It is the necessary crucible in which love differentiates itself from mere attachment. True compatibility is not about two people who always agree. It is about two people who possess the sophisticated shared toolkit to disagree productively and repeatedly without destroying the foundation. If you appreciate this refusal to traffic in the easy, surface-level reassurances that saturate self-help and popular psychology, if you want to ensure this rigorous, unsparing analysis remains available, please take a moment to subscribe right now. Supporting channels that insist on depth is the only way we counterbalance the overwhelming volume of content dedicated to validating your comfort zone. The mature relationship recognizes that the highest form of compatibility is the alignment of purpose, not the alignment of taste. It is the mutual, relentless commitment to navigating the inevitable darkness together, understanding that the friction generated by two distinct egos rubbing together is precisely what heats the relationship, hardening its structure into something genuinely resilient. We must actively cultivate the wisdom to stop interpreting necessary struggle as a cosmic signal for retreat. When we feel that intense urge to run, that heavy weight of relational work, we are not experiencing the failure of destiny, but the very beginning of the forging process. That anxiety we feel is not the universe telling us they are wrong for us. It is our own psychological system protesting the painful process of adaptation and maturity that is now being demanded of us. The person who runs from difficulty is not protecting their happiness. They are protecting their immaturity, ensuring that they will repeat the same superficial cycle with a succession of partners, confusing novelty for profound connection, until they realize that the existential void travels right along with them, carefully packed in their emotional carry-on luggage. The tragedy of the soulmate seeker is that they waste their life searching for a mythical, prefabricated sanctuary when they could have been building a real, imperfect home. The suffering inherent in the soulmate myth is rooted in a fundamental refusal to metabolize reality. It is the insistence that profound connection must also be effortless validation. We treat the partner not as an autonomous, separate consciousness, but as a critical functionary within our own internal drama. When they inevitably fail to perform the role of the perfect, frictionless mirror, when they introduce contradiction, friction, or demand painful change, we panic. This panic is not merely rational disappointment. It is the deep, primordial terror of the child whose caregiver fails to instantly anticipate or meet their need. The mythical soulmate is simply the sophisticated adult nomenclature for the psychological fantasy of the pre-Oedipal mother, the boundless source of unconditional positive regard, who asks nothing, challenges nothing, and exists solely to confirm the perfect sanctity of the self. This relationship structure is inherently doomed because it demands that one independent consciousness perpetually sacrifices its integrity to stabilize the neurotic projection of the other. The moment the partner asserts their separate reality, the moment they say no, or I see you differently, or I need space, the illusion shatters, and the immature psyche registers this catastrophic betrayal as the signal for immediate flight. We run, not because the relationship is fundamentally bad, but because the mirror finally showed us a reflection we were not ready to accept. A self that is incomplete, demanding, and structurally reliant on external validation for its stability. The running is a desperate attempt to protect the internal fiction of our own effortless goodness and inherent flawlessness. We mistake the necessary labor of integrating our shadows, which the partner inevitably illuminates, for evidence of misalignment. This kind of unvarnished psychological diagnosis is often uncomfortable, but it is essential for growth. If you find value in this refusal to sugarcoat the human condition, if you believe that truth, however abrasive, is the only path toward genuine maturity, then please like this video and subscribe. It is the support of listeners who crave complexity that ensures these rigorous explorations can continue to challenge the reigning narrative of superficial ease. By constantly swapping out partners at the first sign of friction, we ensure we never engage the subterranean depths of human connection, where true integration happens. We become experts at the shallow, exhilarating opening movements of love, but terrified amateurs of its long, grueling middle game. The ultimate irony is that the search for the perfect fit, the one who requires no psychological remodeling, guarantees a life spent in an endless loop of superficial novelty, ensuring that we never escape the true prison, which is the unexamined self. To submit to the necessary friction of a mature relationship is to finally concede that the purpose of connection is not comfort, but consciousness. It is the agreement to dismantle the internal structures of self-deception, one painful disagreement at a time, until what remains is something durable, honest, and terrifyingly real. This is where the grand deception of modern romance reveals its hand. We have been sold the fantasy that connection should be effortless, a smooth alignment of two already perfect spheres. But the reality is that the work required for consciousness is anything but smooth. It is a brutal, repetitive chipping away at the self, demanding a psychological remittance that most people are simply unwilling to pay. They prefer the clean balance sheet of solitude or the temporary high of a new, unblemished partner. Consider the high-achieving individual, the CEO or the dedicated physician, who has meticulously curated an external life of competence and control. They can navigate geopolitical strategy or perform complex surgery, yet they collapse entirely when faced with the raw vulnerability required to discuss a persistent resentment or an unfulfilled emotional need with their partner. This person is not failing because they are weak. They are failing because they mistake their professional success, the validation derived from measurable objective output, for genuine emotional maturity. The moment the partner asks them to simply feel an uncomfortable emotion without immediately needing to solve it, the entire edifice of their controlled self-concept trembles. Their psychological immune system flags the partner's request for depth as a dangerous, inefficient drain on resources, and the automatic response is to terminate the perceived threat, usually by concluding that the relationship, not their internal strategy, is fundamentally flawed. We see this played out daily in the modern marketplace of attention, where people discard long-term prospects faster than they abandon old software. The relationship becomes a casualty of a pervasive productivity mindset. If it requires too much maintenance, if it doesn't deliver a constant state of escalating happiness, it must be replaced by a newer, less demanding model. This transactional approach to intimacy is the real pandemic of our time. The refusal to acknowledge that the only thing that distinguishes a profound connection from a casual arrangement is the mutual agreement to witness each other's worst failures without running for the exit. If you appreciate this relentless pursuit of the deeper mechanics driving human behavior, and if you understand that dissecting these uncomfortable truths takes time, research, and a commitment to radical honesty, I urge you to subscribe and join the community of thinkers who actively choose depth over distraction. It is the only way for complex psychological analysis like this to survive in an attention economy designed for the superficial. This flight from friction ensures a peculiar, modern form of loneliness, the feeling of being intimately known by thousands through a carefully crafted digital projection, yet utterly unknown and unseen by the one person sleeping next to you. The terror is not that we will be rejected for our flaws, but that we will be held accountable for our potential. The partner who stays asks us to become the person we could be, demanding that we integrate the fragmented parts of ourself we have spent decades carefully compartmentalizing. The one who runs insists on remaining the person they are, forever trapped in a cycle of self-imposed psychological stasis. The greatest tragedy of the modern, optimized life is this. We have eliminated all the necessary hardships that used to forge the soul, mistaking ease for freedom. And in doing so, we have engineered a world populated by brittle, easily shattered emotional infants who have no capacity to sustain anything real. We have traded the durable steel of commitment for the disposable plastic of convenience, and now we wonder why everything feels so hollow. The only viable defense against this engineered emotional atrophy is a radical, almost spiritual act of choosing the difficult thing, a commitment to the necessary suffering that precedes any genuine transformation. The great realization we must force upon ourselves is this. True connection is not a reward granted for being perfect. It is the unforgiving laboratory where psychological maturity is forged through shared, prolonged conflict. The definitive verdict on transactional intimacy is that it is a profound philosophical error based on a consumer delusion. You do not fall into depth, you excavate it with bloody hands, and the moment you start demanding comfort and ease as a prerequisite for commitment, you forfeit the only chance you had at meaning. We must understand that the pain of enduring friction, of sitting in the uncomfortable complexity of another person's existence, is infinitely preferable to the unique, cold terror of missing out on our own life, because we could not tolerate a few years of struggle. Stop searching for the flawless mirror that reflects back only your best angles. Start searching for the enduring anchor that holds steady during the inevitable storm. The choice before us is simple, if brutal. Do you want a life that is meticulously curated for instant gratification, or a life that is earned through the relentless, exhausting, terrifying process of merging two imperfect, complicated souls? The former is clean, sterile, and meaningless. The latter is messy, painful, and the only proof you have that you were truly alive. If this analysis resonates, if you feel the weight of this cultural hollowness and are dedicated to understanding and transcending these psychological traps, then subscribe right now and join the community built on the bedrock of unflinching self-examination, where we dissect the reality hidden beneath the veneer of modern life. The truth we have so desperately tried to avoid is that the quest for frictionless existence is the death of meaning itself. We waste our finite time searching for relationships that feel like an easy vacation, when the only ones worth having feel like a lifelong, exhausting expedition to an unforgiving, beautiful summit. We have mistaken psychological peace for emotional numbness. We have mistaken surface compatibility for destiny. The final, definitive verdict on our relationship crisis is that the modern pursuit of personal optimization within a partnership is a tragic, self-defeating endeavor that guarantees superficiality. The ultimate spiritual betrayal is to choose the path of least resistance when facing the inevitable necessity of depth. You trade your soul for a slightly smoother ride. Never forget that the systems of convenience are not trying to free you. They are trying to tranquilize you, to make your life just palatable enough that you stop questioning its emptiness. Your highest purpose is not to avoid pain, but to decide which pains are worth enduring, and the pain of profound, genuine connection, of shared struggle and hard-won understanding, is the only pain that ultimately justifies existence. If this analysis resonates, if you feel the weight of this cultural hollowness and are dedicated to understanding and transcending these psychological traps, then subscribe right now and join the community built on the bedrock of unflinching self-examination. where we dissect the reality hidden beneath the veneer of modern life. The optimized life is a cage painted gold. It promises freedom but delivers sedation. We have traded the tragic, messy glory of a genuinely lived life for the sterile comfort of a manageable one. Stop looking for a life that accommodates your weakness. Look for a life that demands your strength. The final, definitive verdict is this. The great lie of our age is that you can optimize your way to fulfillment. Fulfillment is not found in the absence of friction, but in the sustained, difficult effort of confronting reality, not running from it.
The only thing worse than suffering is suffering for nothing. And the optimized life guarantees that all your sacrifices, the sacrifices of depth, risk, and emotional honesty, were made purely for the sake of avoiding something that didn't matter. Choose the beautiful burden over the painless vacuum. Your goal is not to smooth out the edges of existence, but to sharpen yourself against them. If you are ready to stop optimizing your existence and start maximizing your reality, if you are willing to face the difficult questions that convenience has trained you to ignore, then subscribe and join the community that believes true wisdom begins exactly